So in this first week of Advent, we're sitting with Psalm 23 this morning, and the devotional we have asked a great question, and this is a very well-known psalm. It declares that God is our great shepherd, and the question that they asked this morning that I thought was a really good one. This is a well-known psalm, and the question they asked is, why do you think this psalm speaks to so many people? Why does it connect with the depths of people's hearts and souls and minds and strengths? And what is it about this psalm that resonates at the core, at a deep place in our humanity? And for me, as I read through it, I realized there are kind of four things that stood out, and I think those four things progress. That there, a lot of times we see in Hebrew scriptures, there's this sort of narrative progression toward increasing greatness, right? So, like the creation accounts, the sort of the pinnacle, the chief moment of the creation account, of course, is rest, is Sabbath rest. That we see as the goal, the crowning achievement of God's creative work is Sabbath rest. And here, I think in this psalm, there's something similar, where there is this sort of listing of increased blessing that culminates, that finds its pinnacle in the final declaration of blessing that we see from the psalmist. So here's Psalm 23, and I think for me there are four things that stand out as far as blessing that increase in their gravity as we read through. So, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. So here I think we have the blessing of provision. God is the great shepherd who leads us toward the things, the basic sort of home or settings in which we can receive the basic provisions for life. In verse 3, it says, he restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. And so the second thing we see here is guidance. That God is the shepherd who guides us in the right paths. And it continues, right? The right paths is in verse 4, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So it starts with God's provision, and then it moves towards God's guidance. And then, of course, in verse 5, it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. And so then we have this third blessing of protection. So it begins with basic provision that God provides for us, that God guides us. And then here in verse 5, there's this declaration of God's blessing of protection, that in the face of our enemies, God prepares a table for us and anoints our head with oil, and our cup overflows with blessing. Finally, in verse 6, it says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. And so it starts with provision, it moves toward guidance, it then declares that God offers protection as blessing, and of course the culmination here is God's presence. That the blessing of God's presence is ultimately the greatest blessing that could be known as sheep of this great shepherd. As we dwell in the house of the Lord, surely goodness, tov, like this good, and mercy, this hesed, kind of loving kindness, shall follow us all the day. As how do we experience that? Dwelling in the house of the Lord our whole life long. And so there's this narrative trajectory of increased significance and increased blessing as we realize that provision is great, guidance is great, protection, that's all awesome and wonderful. But ultimately, the purpose of all that, the telos, where we're going, what's more important than all of that is just being able to receive the presence of God and to dwell in his midst. So today, may we be reminded that God is our good shepherd. He provides, God protects, God provides, God guides, God protects, God presents himself to us and invites us into this experience of ultimate blessing, the greatest in all creation, of course, which is dwelling in God's presence. May it be so today. Amen.